Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you've had a super fantastic Sparkling Magic Monday. Yes, it's been another one of those busy days where you get so busy. What the heck is bouncing on my screen? Yeah, I'll need to say that. All right, stop my bouncing icons bouncing on the bottom of my screen. My computer tried to do its lockdown thing when I stopped using it, but certain programs were still open and stuff hadn't been saved. So it was saying, we can't close down. Bouncy, 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 bouncy. Anyway, it is Magic Monday today. It is when you can create the magic in your business, create the spark that'll help see you through the week to give you a super fantastic sparkling week. It is the day that you set the goals for the week as well, unless you did it over the weekend, so you're ready to hit the ground running on a Monday. I ended up having a day of numbers today. Not how I intended. I did get a lot of other work done, but then it became a day of numbers. And it reminded me because people were looking at their accounts going, okay, I can't get this to balance and that sort of thing too. So helping people to understand that was fun, because I then had to go in and calculate numbers and figure out and match them up with their credit card charges and all that sort of stuff. But we got it done. But it got me thinking, how well do we know our numbers for our business? And we're always been told you should always know your numbers. And I'm like, I don't know my numbers. I don't know. Maybe it's the rebel in me, because it's a structured system where you got to know your numbers. So I have to find. Seffi's looking for her treats. She's so funny. But you got to find a way in order to. So I have to find a creative way that I can put this process in place where I look at my numbers on a daily basis and look where I'm supposed to be and goals and all of that sort of stuff without making it seem like a process. So I'm working on that because I want it to be fun. I did okay in math. I sucked my last year of school. My last full year of school, I was 16. And we were doing calculus and algebra and sines and cosines. For trigonometry, I managed to figure that out. But when it came to doing sines and when it came to doing calculus and algebra, I was lost. I was like, I can't make head or tails of this. And at the end of the year, we had now in our school system at the time, we had what was called university entrance, and that was a national exam given. And at the last year of your sixth form year, when you're around 16, and I would have been turning 17 at that year. But anyway, and so you have to get 300 points in your top 4 subjects, I think it is. You have to make 300 points in order to pass. So between all the subjects that you sit, they calculate them up, and you have to make 300 points. And I think it's only with like the top 4. I can't quite remember that bit, but. Actually, I think it is the top 4 because I just scraped through. Yeah, but anyway, the other way that you can get university entrance is to have it accredited based on your work throughout the year, your assignment scores, your the tests and exams that they do throughout the year. They can turn around and the amount of work that you put in, that sort of thing, and they can turn around and accredit it to you. And we had a small school, we only had like 600 students. So our sixth form year was very small. And the principal would actually meet individually with each student and go, here's the cutoff line for accrediting, and you're either sitting just above or just below. Or if you're just below, work a little harder and you'll get above that line. And at that point, I had already applied for the Air Force. In fact, my application had only just gone in because it had to be 16 and a half on day of application. So I had that application thing ready and sent it in the day I turned 16 and a half. And I already knew I was going to go in the Air Force. I already knew I was not going to be staying for the final year when we did bursaries. And bursaries was a end of the year exam. And based on your bursary levels, I think it somehow worked out with the universities as to how much you had to pay and that sort of stuff. I don't know. I don't care. I didn't do them. I wasn't planning on doing them anyway. But I also knew that if I got university entrance accredited, that unless I had a higher qualification to go with it, if you're sitting at a job interview and you've got somebody who's sat and passed UE, which university entrance, or you had it accredited, they would look more closely at the person that sat and passed because they had that as a thing, whereas you don't know how much work this other person did throughout the year to get it accredited. Because I know that there were some people who struggled with exams that did have it accredited based on their workload throughout the year and everything else. They were just bad at taking exams and things. So I knew this going into his office. And so he pulls out his piece of paper and he draws this big line, and he draws these little lines above and these little lines below, and he goes, and this is where you're sitting. I'm like, this far below the line, the cutoff line. He said, if you work a little harder, he says you'll get it accredited. I said, that's fine. I said, but I will tell you right here and now, if you accredit me university entrance, I'm going to turn around and hand it back, because that's the option you have, and sit and pass it anyway. And he looked at me and went, why? I said, well, I've applied for the Air Force, and so I know that I'm going to get in. I know that I'm going to be accepted. I know I'm not going to be here for the full year next year to take bursaries at the end of the year. So I'm not going to have a higher qualification to go with my UE certification. And, employees look at, did you sit and pass, or did you have it accredited? And they're more likely to take the person, because they're thinking at the time, more likely to take the person that sit and passed. So I said, I'm not going to have a higher qualification to go with it. So therefore I'm going to sit and pass it. And looked at me and went, really? I said, yeah. And I think it kind of blew him away, because, a little bit of extra work and I would have been accredited, and I wouldn't have to go and sit exams at the end of the year, knowing. And at this point too, I had struggled taking exams throughout my high school years, and he knew this. My guidance counselor had to work with me because I froze up in exams, because then the teachers were all frustrated, because they all knew I knew the material, because I was answering questions in class. My assignments were all good. I was an average B student. So I wasn't, bright, or, wasn't an A student. I was A student on effort. But, I had an average B and all that, but I would fail on my midterms and my end of year exams. And so the guidance counselor figured out what was happening. And so he gave me techniques to get through this. And so I told the principal that I was going to sit and pass this exam anyway. And he was like, okay. And when it came, we all had to sit they had us all sitting in the library, and they handed out all the envelopes and stuff. And those that had the thick envelopes were the ones that they had to sit the exams, and those that had the thin envelopes were the ones that had passed, that had been accredited. And I was kind of happy, because there was a couple of guys that I knew that I was sitting at a table with, who I knew really, really struggled with exams. They were hard workers. They studied like crazy, but they were not very good exam takers. They were worse than I was. And they both got theirs accredited, and I was so happy for them. And then I open up and I get the thick envelope, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to sit and pass this. And I did. And so my English, accounting, physics, and then I had math. Now, math with calculus, I was doing math because I wasn't really passing the class. I was maybe scraping through on that. I did not get calculus or algebra at all. It didn't compute in my mind, but give me trigonometry, not a problem. The year before when we did trigonometry, I was flying through that class. I got the sines, the cosines, that book with all the little tables and numbers in it and everything else, because we had to do it with our heads. We weren't allowed to use calculators. We didn't even have calculators to use at that point, I don't think. We may have, but I don't recall using calculators. We did it the old-fashioned way, using the brain. But trigonometry, I got. Calculus, I did not get. Algebra, didn't understand it. Still don't understand algebra to this day. Brad tried to show me one time about how to use algebra to calculate how much paint we needed. And he's sitting there, he's writing out this big long formula and all that. And I go, what's that? And he goes, this is how you use algebra in a practical situation. And I go, no. I said, it's geometry. I said, it's length times height times width. That wall, length times height, plus that wall, length times height, that wall, length times height. And I said, you add them together, and that's how much paint you need. and he had sat and written out this complex algebra thing, and I'm sort of like, yeah, you don't need that. I said, it's just geometry. Geometry I get. Trigonometry I got. Calculus, no. Algebra, no. And so, yeah, it was kind of funny, that one. But anyway, so on my math test, I got a 32. I kid you not, I got 32, which technically is a fail in the class, but that 32 took me over 300. I think I ended up with something like 302 or 304 or something like that between my English class, my physics class, and my accounting class. And then my math class at 32 was enough to tip me over and pass university entrance with my 300 points. So I was really rapt about that. I was super excited. I got a pass, but then my guidance counselor said, as we're going into my last year of high school, which I knew I wasn't going to complete anyway, he says, you are not to take any math class. He had told me before, and he says, you're not to take any math classes. And I went, okay. So this is the same guy that was telling me I needed a plan B because I would not get into the Air Force. And he's also the same person who told me I had been accepted into the Air Force, which was kind of cool. And so I took statistics. We actually did one class statistics and one class computer programming, and so it was a combined class of statistics and computer programming, and so I took that class. I was flying through that class when I ended up leaving high school to go join the Air Force. So it was I had a fun time at high school with my subjects and numbers. So I'm not a big numbers person, but I don't even know how I got on all of this. But numbers are magical because they help us know where we are. And if you're setting your goals, where you need to be and what work you need to do in between to get from point A to point B. So yes, we need to know our numbers. I'm trying to find a creative way to help me with that process because I'm flying around. Brad used to look after all that stuff, but I still have to come up with a way to know my numbers in a creative way. So that was kind of fun doing that. So there is magic in numbers, that I do agree. There are some puzzles that I enjoy doing that involve numbers. Now, Brad loved not Sudoku. I don't mind Sudoku. There was one. It's kind of like a crossword puzzle where you get the number at the end, and there's a number of boxes leading up to that one, and you have to figure out which numbers go in place. And there's no repetition of numbers or something like that. And he was a very big numbers guy. He loved his math. And he loved these puzzles. They had a name like Sudoku, but it was some other name it was like a numbers crossword thing. And the answers were there. You just had to come up with the 2 or 3 or 4 numbers or 5 numbers that would equal that number at the end of the row. But you couldn't repeat a number in a line. Yeah. Because if you came down, you couldn't. If there was a number already there, you couldn't repeat that number coming down, and you couldn't. There was something about repetitive numbers in there. I don't remember. I don't know. I don't like those puzzles. He loved them. But so there's magic in numbers. Take note of your numbers. They can be fun. So I'm told. But then I liked accounting. Go figure. So you're thinking of becoming an accountant in the Air Force, and then they looked at all my library work that I had done through high school and middle school, and they said, why don't you become a publication specialist? I said, what's that? They go, basically a librarian. I went, okay, I can do that. But so there's magic in numbers. There's also magic in songs. I don't know what happened. I don't know what triggered this, but I've had a song playing through my head like most of today. And every time I try to sing it sometimes I got to sing the song to get it out of my head. And it just sat there and it kept playing over and over and over and over again. I could hear the words and that was fine. But as soon as I started singing the words, the waterworks would start. And I was like, what the heck is going on? I don't know what's going on. I'm like looking at the dates going, no, there's no anniversaries involving Brad around today, or that all that stuff was last week with the purchasing of Sparkles and moving into Sparkles. That was all last week, and that was fine. I don't know what it was, but there was something, because this song has incredible lyrics to it, and it's called The 12th of Never, and it's been a favorite of mine for eons. And I don't know if Brad's ever heard the song. I don't even know if he knew the song or anything else, but it has been playing in my head constantly all day. And every time I would, for whatever reason, every time I walked in the bedroom, Zephyr would be laying there on the bench, she'd open her eyes and look at me, and I'd start singing the song, and I don't know. I have no. Grief sucks. It really does, because you never know when it's going to hit, and a lot of times you don't know why it's going to hit. And I think it was something to do with that today, and the lyrics and the song. And I'm not even going to tell you. You're going to have to go look up the lyrics for yourself, because if I start telling you what the lyrics are, I'm probably going to start singing it, and that's going to start the waterworks. So that ain't going to happen today. Sorry, folks. You're going to have to go look up the lyrics for The 12th of Never. And but there was just those lyrics were really speaking to me in some way today, and I don't know why. I don't know what triggered it. It's just one of those things that grief just sucks up, just sneaks up behind you and goes, and you're like stuck in that zone. So it's been a hard day emotionally for me today, and I have no idea why, except for I can only put it down to grief. And I'm feeling a lot better now. Had a nap after work. Had a nap, and it's still playing in my head, but not as loudly and in the front as it was earlier. Because when it's in the front of my head, that's when I've got to sing it. If any of you are like me and you know that feeling, you know that when you get that song stuck in the front of your head, it's like you've got to start singing it because you can't ignore it. Now it's quiet and it's in the back of my head where I can barely hear it, for which I'm thankful right now, because it's been a day of waterworks, just because of the song. And like I said, I don't know if Brad knew of the song. I don't know if he had ever heard it. I just know it's been a favorite of mine for years. And it was the Donny Osmond version that I heard first, and it's the only version I have ever heard. And although he did change it up some, and I don't like the new version. I like the old 70s version he did. But yeah, so if you go look up the lyrics of the 12th of Never, I'm not going to tell you what they were all, except that it's a very long, long time. That's some of the lyrics. It's a long, long time. And but yeah, so grief is weird. It's like you can go along feeling great, and all of a sudden it just comes along, oh, you're having too much fun, whoop, on the back of the head, and you're back down there again. You got to crawl your way back out. But I have my little coping mechanisms, and trying to get the song out of my head was a very hard thing to do, and especially while you're working and you're sitting here, typing up replies and that, and the song starts going again in your head, and you're like, go to the back of the head, turn the volume down, try to turn the volume, and I tried turning the volume down in my head to quieten it down, and it was just like, yep, nope, not going to happen. So if you're grieving, I get it. And if you're grieving, you get what I'm going through. So there's just certain songs, and yet this was never a song that we danced to. It's never I don't recall ever hearing this song with Brad, and I don't know if he's ever heard it or if he knew of it or if he liked it or anything like that. But it's not a song that I recall us sitting together and listening to while we're driving in the car, or having it come on the radio, that sort of stuff. So it was just weird. But on that note of weirdness, it's Monday. It's magical. So that's probably part of Monday's magic. You got numbers and songs that make you cry. Who knew? But I know this week's going to be an incredible week. I got a full plate this week. It's going to be a lot of fun. I got three networking calls to do this week. One of them is actually an interview, so that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll tell you more about that one. I think that one's Thursday. Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. I'm going on a live, so that's going to be fun. And we're going to be talking about moving forward. Yes, how you can't move on, but you can move forward from a thing. So anyway, go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we will catch you guys tomorrow for Tune Up Tuesday. Hey, konera.